Hey everybody, Iridux here. Recently, I had a lot of ideas for various RP guides, journal entries and the like. Therefore, I decided that this time I want to try something a bit differently. Thus, this format. Anyway, the topic I want to discuss with you today is the topic of character power levels in MMO role-playing. Because it's a topic as old as MMO role-playing itself, with concepts like special snowflake or guard emoting and so on. And often in other MMO roleplay settings I've participated in, like in World of Warcraft or Elder Scrolls Online, I often find that the take on power level will often be that your character just shouldn't be too powerful, because then you're guard emoting, with obvious exceptions. But the topic of power level is especially relevant to Star Wars The Old Republic role-playing, particularly Sith role-playing, since power is a central element to that theme. I think we all have an idea as to how skilled or powerful our characters are in certain areas. Thus, we have this idea of our characters having an inherent power level, which would roughly be the equivalent of their skills and powers put down on a sheet, like in a tabletop role-playing game where they have gradually leveled up through the time in which we have role-played them. The issue is that, with the exception of guilds, where everybody have an idea as to how powerful their characters are in relation to each other, people can't see this imaginary sheet and this imaginary idea of your character's inherent power level. And even if they did, they might not agree with them. Therefore, the truth is that your character has no inherent power level in an MMO setting. In fact, the power level of your character is entirely dependent on the people around you and how powerful they allow you to be, since we are in fact playing make-believe. Well then, how do you determine the power level of your character in a given situation then? Or rather, how do you portray the power level of your character in a way that is most plausible to make the people you're role-playing with accept it at face value? I think it comes down to three factors: situation, reputation, and RP etiquette. Now keep in mind that these three factors can't really be separated, because they all three impact each other and the given situation where you're trying to portray the power level of your character. But for the sake of example, let's say that you're on Korriban and your character is a regular. Most people know who he is, and he is accepted as moderately powerful. Here you can see that reputation is involved here. Since your character has a reputation, he can get away with more. But with that reputation also comes certain limitations and so on. But reputation can also turn against you. For instance, if your character or you as a player are known to play overpowered characters without any real, character development to them, you might find that other players will be reluctant to accept the power level you portray as your characters, because you will just be considered as guard emoting or something along those lines. Another thing to really keep in mind is RP etiquette. When you roleplay as a powerful character, you have a certain responsibility to your fellow roleplayers. Since when we roleplay together, we are trying to tell a story together with other people, meaning that there should be a case of mutual fun in most situations. Therefore, you shouldn't use your character's position or power level to essentially bully other people just for the sake of it. Of course, if you're playing a powerful Sith Lord and you have an actual good reason to punish somebody, you should of course do that, but don't go out of your way to fling your character's power around, because if you fling it around too often, you will often encounter a level of resistance. And this is especially so if you really try and abuse your character's power level to force some severe consequences on other people's characters to accept, for instance, character death or severing a limb or trying to break their minds or something like that. So keep that in mind. You don't want to end up with a reputation where you're known as the guy who tries to kill off people's characters without, adhering to proper RP etiquette, which in this case would be to get an OC consent before you really harm somebody's characters, with the exception of, really silly situations, which you should try and avoid, because often it will just result in drama. An example would be a character trying to kill your characters, somebody in their family or something like that. In that situation, your character might want to outright kill them, and there's no real way of explaining why they wouldn't. In that situation, I'd suggest that you try and throw something at the other character or allow them to flee, essentially. But in such a situation, do also try and take into account who you're dealing with. For instance, if it's an obvious troll, you could probably just ignore them, or if it's a new role player, maybe try and go a bit more light on them, or make an excuse for your character not to try and outright kill them. On the other hand, if it's a very experienced role player and you're very sure that they know what they're doing and what the obvious consequences would be, perhaps, give them a polite OC whisper and ask them whether they're aware of what's coming to them. Just keep in mind that some people will go out of their way to misinterpret your polite warning or inquiry as you trying to intimidate them OC to behave another way. So be very explicit about, I'm not trying to tell you that if you do this, my character will do this. Just be aware that you've sort of put yourself in a situation where I don't really have any other option than my character now trying to murder yours or do something severe against yours. Are you aware of this? And then perhaps give that person a chance to back out. But on the other hand, if they're totally cool with it, then go all in, And in that situation, it might also be wise to screenshot that consent. It shouldn't really be necessary in an ideal world, I know, but we're not living in an ideal world, and OC drama does frequently happen due to these things. Might as well cover your back. But I think we're going a bit off topic here. To try and return to the 3 points before about situation, reputation, and RP etiquette, and really show how much these impact your character's power level in the situation, I'd like to contrast the example I just gave with another one. Now, in this situation, this fairly well-known character of considerable power level is going to go somewhere else undercover. So let me provide you an example from my own roleplay. My character, Darth Iridox, is an Ansat, and sometimes he will want to go somewhere and hunt. When I do this, I log in on another character who resembles him in appearance, just not with the glowing eyes, since he's capable of concealing those. But the character has a different name and wears, in-game name, and wears a different attire. So most people won't really be able to recognize that it's him, since he is consciously going somewhere else to act as another person while he's hunting. Now, in this situation, I obviously can't count on the reputation of my character to precede him. Therefore, I can't get away with the power feats I would usually be able to utilize on Iradox if it came to a confrontation. Thus it comes down to a sense of playing fair. This other person whom my character ends up trying to hunt doesn't know who my character is, and therefore he won't expect the power level of a very experienced dwarf. And if I try to pull that on them, most likely they'll wrinkle their nose and think that this person they're role-playing with is some god emoter who has a far too high opinion of their own character's power level. And to be fair, if I was on the other side of the coin, I would think so as well. Therefore, I will always scale down my character's power level in these situations, because I realize how it would look if I did not. And because I realize that my character has no inherent power level, as I mentioned previously, aside from what the person I'm role-playing with is willing to afford me. Of course, this means that your character might be bested by another character whom in your mind shouldn't be able to beat them because they are far less experienced or powerful than yours. But in that case, you just have to make up an excuse for yourself, because it's your own fault that you are in this situation, since you chose to discount the reputation of your character. So in my case, what I do is that since Iradox has plenty of prisoners and victims to feed his insane hunger on a daily basis, what he does when he heads out hunting is that he's out there for the thrill. And there's no thrill in hunting if he just uses his force powers to catch a victim. Therefore, he scales his powers down to actually give a sense of the thrill of the hunt by providing the victim with an actual chance to escape him or to fight back. Here it should also be remarked that you don't always have to win just because you feel your character should in a situation. Remember, we are role-playing here, and that's a case of mutual fun, and sometimes it's alright, to lose or to allow another character to escape your own. Often that will result in more roleplay. Maybe your character chastises himself for failing in that situation, or maybe that character will come back later and you can have a little bit of a rivalry going or something along those lines. Or maybe one of the characters will bring friends next time and it can become more interesting. Just in those situations, do keep up some level of out-of-character communication, and do ensure that you're on the same level when it comes to in-character confrontations, because often there will be different takes on how such a confrontation ought to take place, and what's fair game? Is character deaths fair game? Is it fair game to suddenly ambush a character while they're somewhere else, and so on? And for God's sake, don't call your guildies and tell them to suddenly show up and so on. Then you start using out-of-character means to win an in-character fight. But again, I'm going off topic now, because this is more a topic of how to handle in-character confrontations. Moving on, there are two more topics I'd like to cover in this video. The first is talking about the power level of your character versus the power level of a lore character. Because through these 5 years that I've been role-playing in Star Wars The Old Republic, I've seen quite a few people say that your character should never be as powerful as a lore character. This cannot be discussed. Well, to that I just have to say that I can see how that's a good rule of thumb for new role players who doesn't know where else to put the limit. But for experienced role players, you should be able to see that's a very unsophisticated limitations to put on yourself. I mean, let me deconstruct it here in 2 minutes. One should not be as powerful as a lore character. That means you cannot do all the stuff Valkyrian can. You cannot become a big force entity who can destroy an army by lifting his hand. And you can't become the Outlander and take over the galaxy. Sure, I'm following you so far. That makes perfect sense. Of course we can't do that. But if you're saying I can't be as powerful as a lore character, then what about a character like Darth Roran from the Sith Warrior storyline? You know, the Dark Council member you have to, spoilers, you have to protect in chapter 3 on Corellia, because he's too weak to defend himself from against a regular Sith Lord. Does that then mean that your roleplay character can't exceed the power of a Sith Lord? What about lore characters who aren't especially powerful? I mean, you can see where I'm going, right? It's too limiting, and it destroys roleplay. Of course, I mean, you should be able to become as powerful as makes sense for your character without becoming this planet-devouring thing like Darth Nihilius, of course. What you really need to just realize is what I said before: your character's inherent power level depends on the situation and the people you're around. And you should realize that your character cannot affect galactic events of the main story, of course. I mean, they can try and they can want to do that. For instance, my character often tries to affect the political climate of the Empire and so on, but he can't affect what Athena will do in the next story update, obviously. So my response to that is that don't try and measure player characters against lore characters, period. Within reason, of course. And don't make your character insanely powerful just for the sake of making them insanely powerful. Have each development add something to roleplay. And if your character ends up learning some crazy force powers and becoming powerful gradually through time, because that's the way roleplay advances, then so be it. The last point is a case of immersion versus epic feats. And when I'm saying epic feats, I'm talking about really great feats of power, something like conjuring an illusionary fleet, or performing an essence transfer, or conjuring an army of zombies, or something along those lines, all of which can be performed in Star Wars lore, at least if we're referring to Legends, which is what we play in. Therefore, I would say that such things can and have happened in roleplay, and that's fine. If it serves a purpose, that is. And if it can be added in a way that adds to a story and doesn't break immersion. A good example of how this is done well is if your character performs this epic feat as a part in a storyline and it causes immense strain. Immense strain exhausts your character. Perhaps that exhaustion then affects them and adds something to their development, or the roleplay the next coming days, or something like that. An example of epic feats done wrong is that if it's done with the shrug of a shoulder, like your character just conjures an army of Sith zombies through some pre-prepared artifacts, and it's not really a big deal for them, and they can just totally do this, then you're just making yourself look bad, essentially, because you're just flinging around your character's power, and you're going over the top, and it doesn't really add to anything other than look at me, look at how powerful I am, and that's not fun for anyone. Anyway, I hope you found this video instructive and that it caused you to reconsider some things if you didn't know all of this already. And I hope my mumbling didn't drive you insane. As I mentioned in the start of the video, this is the first time I'm trying to record a discussion like this. Therefore, I would very much appreciate if you provided me some feedback, whether that be positive or negative. You are very much allowed to tell me that it sucked and that I'm annoying. But if you do that, please be so kind as to tell me why I sucked and why I was annoying so that I can improve. You can find my feedback thread linked at the bottom of all my forum posts. And with that, I'm out. Thanks for listening.